Hey everybody, I just wanted to make this video about Chinese stocks and its risks. I'm not a financial advisor, this is just my opinion, so please do your own research. I just want to share my opinions and views on this matter because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation going on and people have personal agendas, and I do too. And I want to explain how I view things, which is why I focus and invest on Chinese stocks and Chinese investments primarily, okay? So, a few things we need to identify are the risks to invest in Chinese equities. One is delisting risks. One is a second one would be like geopolitical tensions, like a war with China or something. And so I'm gonna just start with those two. Okay. So let's talk about delisting risks. If Chinese stocks were delisted, um, if Chinese stocks are delisted, which comprise many people's 401ks, pensions, retirement funds, um, people collect their dividends, they make their livelihood off these things, these instruments. If these things were to get, if Chinese stocks were to get delisted, a lot of pensions, a lot of hedge funds, a lot of your retirements, well, it would basically be like losing your right leg of a human being if the financial industry were to lose access to the Chinese markets. So if that were to happen, yeah, a lot of people would die because of this. You basically would have people's net worth destroyed, people's pensions, retirement destroyed, people's dividends destroyed, people's net worth destroyed, not just in America, but globally, because the Chinese market is one of the biggest markets in the entire world. And if you think that the United States markets or the European markets are worth a lot, the Chinese market is worth more in different aspects and projected to be much more in the coming future. So if we lost access to the Chinese markets by a delisting from popular markets, it would destroy a huge aspect of the financial market. It would destroy the economy too, because basically what you're doing is that you're cutting off the leg, your right or left leg, um, which has a lot of devastating impacts. Okay, like the repercussions are would be tremendous, and you should do research on this. But basically, my view on this, or the idea that you should get, is that it's more like weighing the possibilities of these things. Like, yes, it's a possibility, but to what extent is it a possibility? Like, if you were to delist Chinese companies, which is worth over hundreds of billions of dollars, how many lives globally would be impacted by that? How many lives would be ruined? Millions, billions, right? Um, the economy is very fragile in the way that it is, right? When you shut down the economy, even during COVID, when we only had essential employees run the economy, it definitely impacted the whole entire world tremendously. So if you were to have the Chinese and stocks delisted, well, it's not just Chinese stock delisted and that's it. Um, the negative repercussions would be things like, okay, the U.S. and China stop doing business. China kicks out a lot of U.S. companies, and there's over thousands of U.S. companies that are very prominent in China that have relied on China, and like Tesla, for example, um, it pretty much relies on Tesla to be profitable. Walmart as well, Target, a lot of these big companies in America rely on China, and these are just three. Apple as well. So if you remove China and you cut connections to China, uh, you your countries and your world would just collapse. Okay, so it's impossible. Like it's almost impossible at this point. It's like you're basically if you're betting on Chinese delisting, then you're basically betting that the world's gonna end. Okay, because that could lead towards things like World War III or a Cold War type thing, and we're not actually having a Cold War. Okay, because if you look at things like the trade data, trade with China is only increasing. It's not decreasing. Companies aren't really decoupling from China either. I mean, perhaps some companies are moving away from China and they're doing business with other countries, but it's not for any kind of um, it's not for any like altruistic purposes or moral reasons. It's more because they can get cheaper labor from less developed countries, right? That's globalization. It makes sense. So it's not because, oh, we want to decouple from China, we want to become less reliant on China. It's more, well, we can get the same thing manufactured from like Vietnam or Cambodia for slightly cheaper, and we're going to move our factories there. So, yeah, it has nothing really to do with moral reasons. I don't think anything that businesses and governments do on a macro scale is generally for like moral purposes or because they care about people. It's more for a profit and to fuel whatever machine or agenda that they have. So when it comes to Chinese equities being delisted, yes, some will be. And it is a possibility. But it's just that if all of them were to be delisted, especially like these high market capped ones or these ones that are very popularly traded or just, well, what would that do to the value of the stock exchanges as well? It would drastically cut them down. And then the primary stock exchanges in Hong Kong or Shanghai, these stock exchanges would probably grow in value as well and would attract much more investors and hedge funds globally. And that would be the last thing that the United States will want to do. They wouldn't want to destroy their financial system, and a financial system revolves around them because that's something they can weaponize, and that's something the United States can take advantage of to get things that, what they want. So it'd be a huge mistake if the United States were to delist Chinese investments and Chinese stocks and Chinese assets and invest and other investable forms of investments. It would just be devastating, not only for Americans, but for the Chinese and people globally. It just wouldn't make sense because you can't just delist Chinese companies and say, okay, that's it. And now all my money and all the investors' money is going to go into American equities and investments. No, it's going to be a more multipolarized world. It's going to be um, more division. You're going to expect things like China to stop trading the US. They're going to stop buying up debt from the US. They're going to stop offering cheap goods. And there's other things too, like other countries that align with the United States or China will, show retaliation in some form. So yeah, it's really not a good thing to have Chinese stocks delisted. I know a lot of people think and they want Chinese stocks to be delisted because it's like if they have Amazon and Alibaba, which are two e-commercing giants and much more, they might think, okay, so if Americans can't invest in Alibaba, then they're just going to throw their money into American blue chips like Amazon or something like that. And that's what a lot of these investors think, retail investors, because they hope that, right? Because they think that it's a zero sum game and that Chinese equities are taken away from US equities. But they're not, in a sense, because people are always going to look for value. So if there's value in other markets or other equities, it's just where it's going to go. And you can't have these companies overvalued forever. I mean, it would be just like you can't have these companies disproportionately priced towards one another. It would just become really imbalanced. And yeah, if people think that by taking away from, like, if they think that delisting Chinese companies will help better boost up the stock prices of available equities, I think that's a foolish thing to hope for because the outcome would just be devastating. It's not going to happen like that. Yes, if you don't give people alternative options, they might seek other options that aren't what they want. And it will become a market that's not really, people can't find value in. But if you were to remove the Chinese equities worth over hundreds of billions of dollars, what you're doing is you're having a financial war at that point. And yeah, so the repercussions of that would be tremendous. You can't do something like that. It doesn't make sense. First of all, it's unreasonable. Um, if you were to look at the accounting, if people are concerned about Chinese accounting, well, they should look at U.S. accounting because it's not much better. If you look at this SEC's website, you'll see a lot of fraudulent activities reported from American listed companies all the time. So it's not any different. They're pretty much the same. They all have fraudulent activities going on. There's always corruption. So to me, it's mostly just propaganda. It's more that like algorithms, bots, and traders and investors just have their own agenda. Like why would they want to see Chinese equities boosted? Because if Chinese companies have more money, it means that they can raise more money or more capital to invest towards things like research and development, expansion, and growth. And that would take away US market share in a sense, whether it be financially or their products and services, and they would be able to better compete. But, if you like a free market, then you should respect that because that makes products and goods more available for everyone. So it shouldn't matter, okay? So that's interesting to consider as well. An example of this would be like with how people view companies like Meta. Okay, Meta's Instagram, TikTok, and okay, let's just use those two. Like there's Snapchat too, but let's just use those two. Or YouTube Shorts. A lot of people. Okay, there's like a few types of people. There's one type of people who hate Instagram and TikTok because they just don't like the way the platform is, which that's good. That makes sense. Like there's a lot of reasons to dislike them for like data mining and not stealing, but taking people's data and reselling it. Um, what it does to the psychology. There's a lot of reasons why you can dislike it, and you should dislike both of them equally. But if you dislike one because one is Chinese supposedly and one is American, well, I can assure you that whether it be a Chinese, an Asian, a black, a white, a Hispanic, it doesn't matter. Um, they're gonna screw you just the same. So it's like, does it matter if it's a Mark Zuckerberg or not? It's like they're both gonna take your money and they're both gonna screw you just as much as the other. So that's one. And there's some people who think, okay, Instagram is better because at least one is American, but TikTok is not. So if I'm going to be screwed over, it might as well be by uh, someone who is who isn't who's 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 from America or something. Okay, or white. I don't know. And that's kind of racist right there. And I can assure you that it doesn't matter if it's like a white or a Chinese or an Asian or a European. It doesn't matter. Like these people screw you over just as much as the other for financial gain. Okay, so the difference between TikTok and Instagram isn't that big. They both use very similar tactics on how they profit. It doesn't really matter. So you should dislike both of them or like both of them, but to have one racist bias over the other because you think one country is different than the other, I can assure you that both companies are pro-capitalist and pro-exploiting you for money. Okay, so it shouldn't really matter. But some people who own like a Meta, for example, they Meta stock, they want TikTok to be delisted, but they don't want Instagram to be delisted or not. They want TikTok to be banned, but they don't want Instagram to be banned. Not because they think both aren't morally corrupt. It's because they think that okay, if TikTok is banned, then Instagram, my Meta stock will go up tremendously because all those viewers from TikTok will go to Instagram. Okay, and you know what? I think that's a very fair assumption. I think that it's fair to assume that a lot of viewers will go from Instagram, from TikTok to Instagram or YouTube or whatever platform, social media platform. That's very fair, but that doesn't really capitalistic to me. It seems very anti-free market. It seems very corruption. It doesn't seem very. Well, you're taking away people's freedoms, not because you actually care about people's freedoms or data or anything. You're willing to give up people's products and service availability at the sake of your own money. Like you want more money, you hope for more money. And it's like this. TikTok and Instagram have to constantly compete for people's viewership. So maybe they have to constantly offer more for the cost of less. And you kind of want Instagram to monopolize the entire social media industry. And it's sort of like, okay, why would you want that? If you actually cared about people in general, isn't it better to have more competitors globally or in general so that way people get better products and services for less because companies will have to constantly bid for viewership and attention? So why would you want to remove that for personal profit? It's not that so people's morals, it can constantly change. And I don't know. With this, it's like, again, if you were to ban TikTok from the United States, what is the repercussion of that? Like, what? Yes, I do think that I do think that Chinese will just work around this loophole and they will find a way and they will just innovate harder. Which is that really what you want? Also, with the United States, it's kind of like you can't just ban everything that does better than your country and then I don't know, just I don't think that's the way to go about things because these countries aren't the same. Like, some people argue, okay, we can't have Facebook in China, so why can TikTok be in the United States? Well, there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of bureaucracy for a lot of different things. So it's like, okay, but the United States allows, but China allows a lot of production and manufacturing from American companies. So you rely on China in some aspects, and then China doesn't allow some things. But also the US doesn't allow some things from China. So it's like you pick and choose like what is allowed and what is not. So yes, maybe China might not allow certain things like Facebook in America or in China. But China gives in other ways to make up that deficit, whether it be in manufacturing, production, cheap labor, trade, resources, supply chains, all these other things, which come in like many different forms, which is why this happens. It's like, look, everything happens for a reason. And it's like, okay, maybe here's an example. China will say something, okay, we'll buy like X amount of debt. We'll allow like 100 US companies to come in and enter our markets, but you can't have Facebook here, but we can have TikTok in the United States. That's one form of trade, right there. And it's like, and some people from like a very narrow point of view might think like, oh, this is unfair. Yeah, it is unfair, but life is unfair. Okay, we have sanctions and trade wars for reasons. We have tariffs, right? These are just different forms of tariffs, right? But I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I'm just saying like it's a bit hypocritical. And yeah, you know what? Maybe I'm expecting United States citizens to be a little bit more on the moral high ground because that's what America's all about. So if you feel like, oh, you give slack on different countries, well, yeah, well, a lot of countries don't go around saying that they're the biggest democracy in the world either. So, but yeah, so to go back to what I was saying, if you were to list Chinese equities, from the U.S. stock markets, the repercussions would be devastating. It would just destroy people's livelihoods. It would destroy millions of lives globally, and it would just probably lead sort of like maybe a Great Depression, because it's the initial shock of delisting billions of dollars from the stock market, which would destroy a lot the financial system, and then you have like other repercussions too, like trade wars, increased tariffs, supply chain shortages again, because that's how fragile the economy is. Okay, if you're to delist two companies, for example, like Alibaba or I don't know, not Sinopec, but like just a few Chinese companies, okay? If they don't have certain access to the financial systems, like US financial systems or the financial markets, the entire system would implode. It would be like playing Jenga, and then you pull out a stick thinking like nothing's going to happen, but the whole thing collapses. And that's basically what you're doing. And that's why it never happens. You hear a lot of propaganda saying, oh, it's going to happen, it could happen, but it doesn't happen for a very good reason. And, you know, the stock market loves volatility. News media outlets love volatility and clicks and views. So, of course, they're going to pump out the same thing over and over again. So, is the delisting of Chinese equities very possible? Not really, in my opinion. It's very unlikely. It's like betting that World War III is going to happen. And at that point, you're not going to care about your stocks. You're going to care about how much cans of food you have. Okay? But, it's like if you do delist Chinese companies, well, Tesla, Walmart, Target, they're not going to exist anymore. Costco's not going to be there either. You're going to have all these Chinese companies that are US companies that rely on China. Apple, all gone. And they can't just shift production towards like India because India doesn't have the skilled labor or the infrastructure to really support these companies. So what would that do? It would raise the price of goods and services tremendously. There would be a huger supply shortage, and you'd see inflation that would just devastate people's lives. So it's not going to happen unless people want the Great Depression 2.0 and worse. It's not going to happen. So I'm sorry, you can't just have things your way. You can't just have Chinese stocks delisted and then everyone goes their merry way. No, if you delist Chinese stocks, the whole financial system's going to collapse. And then when it comes to war with China, like what are the possibilities of that? Very unlikely. Because if you were to have war with China, well, think about it like this. If the US is becoming more reliant on other countries like China or India or other developing countries for their manufacturing and production and resources, if the US is becoming more reliant on them, how can the US bite the hand that feeds them? Well, they can't. So, if the US is already going through hardship as it is, with the inflation, and it's not even that bad, okay? It's not bad compared to other countries. When you look, and the US economy is one of the better ones out of this whole ordeal when it comes to how the global economy's been performing for the past decade. If you have a war with China, it's not just going to be China. It's going to be other countries too, like China, Russia, India, the Middle East. You can't have a war with just China and expect not a world war to happen. So you're either betting that we're going to have no war with China or World War III. So we're not going to have World War III. So I was looking at a few sets of data a while back, and it was regarding the whole thing of Taiwan. Well, Xi Jinping never said that he wanted Taiwan he never wanted reunification of Taiwan today, tomorrow, next year. He just said he wants it done sometime between now and 2050. But what is reunification? And what if it doesn't ever happen, in a sense that, like, you would have to think, okay, what is their version of reunification? Keeping the status quo? Having more control? Well, people can't really identify it because they don't really know how to quantify this type of reunification. Like, what does reunification actually mean? Because to me, it almost, look, if China stops trading with Taiwan for a month, Taiwan would be devastated. They wouldn't have supplies, food, energy. They can't it would be really hard for a country like Taiwan, or not country, but whatever it is, state, whatever, part of China, province, it would be really hard for Taiwan to be independent because it relies so drastically and heavily on China. So I was looking at such a data, and it basically said that most Taiwanese citizens were perfectly fine with the status quo, which is like have some autonomy, but also be, I guess, viewed as a province of China in a sense, or treated in that way. So there's that. And then, like, I think even with the Hong Kong, the whole thing with Hong Kong protest, like, I think with the news media, it does sensationalize a lot of things, and it does push personal agendas. So it's like, okay, if 10,000 people in Hong Kong feel a certain way and the youth are easily manipulated, well, what about the millions of people in Hong Kong? Maybe they're either indifferent or they're against that idea and they just don't care. Because was Hong Kong under the British control, was it really that much better? Based on the research I've done, it doesn't seem like it's all that great. Ever since the British colonialism, not British, but the whole thing of colonization. India and China were very similar. Like we can't forget about the Opium Wars 1 and 2. So was Hong Kong under British control really that great? From what I read, not really. The citizens were treated very poorly, and it's not like everybody's against these kind of things too. It's like when you look at Hawaii, it's like not everybody is against like keeping sovereignty, and not a lot of people are against having relationships with the United States or other countries either. Like it just depends on who you ask, and radicals or people who have a differing opinion can be sensationalized by the media. So it's like maybe a certain percentage of Hong Kong people in Hong Kong want their whatever form of autonomy, or I don't know, would they want autonomy? Would they want to be back under British control? Would they want to be with China? It's like there's so many different opinions on it, and it's so easy to find someone to say one thing or the other. So it's like maybe the US media will say, okay, people in Taiwan want autonomy and people in Hong Kong want autonomy, or these two countries want to be under like a Western Euro or United States rule, or they want to be of China. It's like it's really hard to find what is true amongst the majority of people because there's so many factors. There's corruption in the political atmosphere, there's sensationalization of radical groups, there's many different opinions. But from the data I received, it seems like most people just generally want to keep the status quo, which is whatever things are now. People in Taiwan generally don't fear for their lives either. Like they don't think, okay, there's going to be an invasion of China, but war generals in America are constantly talking about that. Protecting and having a war with China at the stake of Taiwan. That's what it is. Like they're going to forsake Taiwan and use Taiwanese or Han Chinese in Taiwan to fight a war of China. Kind of like use like a proxy war in a sense. And that's just not, it's not really good. And I don't think China's going to fall for that, because if you're going to compare China to Russia, these two countries are just completely different, okay? Because China wins in a sense globally in the game of capitalism by just innovating, selling products and services, and leading economically by just existing with the way they've planned things out. That's all they can really do is just win economically, okay? The United States loves wars. That's why they've been in so many wars. That's why they continue to be in wars. That's why they participate in wars, because it's very profitable. And a war, a physical war of China, wouldn't be in China's best interest. So they're not going to do it. It doesn't make any economical sense. It doesn't make any moral sense, it doesn't even align with the Xi Jinping's goal or China's goal. It would only benefit the United States to have a war with China because the U.S. military industrial complex benefits from it. They weaken their competitors physically in order to assert their dominancy, and it makes them easier to exploit. So it doesn't really make sense for the China to have a war. And I don't even think China wants a war because it doesn't make sense. It's like that China has way more to lose than the United States. It would be like if you had 100, it's like if you were to have, if you were a really rich, successful person and you loved yourself and you're just succeeding in life and you don't want to fight anybody, you just want to go on your way, go to work and succeed. And a homeless man comes up to you, wants to fight you because they envy you and they want to take your stuff, or they just want to fight you because they're angry with the world and how it's been going. You have way more to lose by fighting this homeless because you could die if they stab you or shoot you. But this homeless man doesn't have much to lose besides his life, and he has nothing to live for. So the China, in a sense, is kind of like the rich guy succeeding, while the homeless guy is kind of like the United States. The homeless guy has more to loot. No, the homeless man has more to gain, and you have way more to lose. So don't fight that war. See, so that's why. Like in Rocky 3, where Rocky is giving that he won his professional match or something, or was doing a speech, and then Mr. T calls him out. Well, it's like that. Mr. T wants to instigate a fight with Rocky because he has more to gain, while Rocky has way more to lose, and that's why Mickey says don't fight that. But yeah. So if you do your research, people in Taiwan don't think there's going to be a fight. They're not scared of China because they don't think that China's going to come and invade them. And people in China don't think there's going to be a war either. But US is instigating a lot of their people to feel a certain way. Why? That I don't know, but there could be numerous reasons on that. But it could also be just creating volatility in the Chinese equity markets, because it's like with the company NIO. If that company is worth over $100 billion in market cap, that means a company like NIO can raise tremendous amounts of capital in order to invest towards research and development. Same with Alibaba, same with Pinduoduo. If these Chinese companies have access to the American markets and they start being worth hundreds of billions of dollars, they can raise so much capital that they can just throw money into research and development and expansion, which inevitably would take market share away from the United States. So they would make these competitors even more competitive. So would you want that if you were pro-America? Probably not. You're basically giving them ammo and capital. So it could be that this entire thing to, claim about delisting, bringing China fear, saying there's going to be a war, is just to deter American investors away from Chinese investors through propaganda, rather than saying you guys cannot invest in Chinese stocks or Chinese equities or investments. You can't do that. That would be illegal. You can't really the American government can't do that. So it's like a form of manipulation. They say like, okay, we can't bar people from investing in Chinese companies, but we will discourage them as best as possible through manipulation and mental tactics, which, seems probably what it is at most. But you can't really keep these investments low forever because eventually there's just too much value to be had. And then you see like sudden sharp rises. But there's numerous reasons too. Like maybe Chinese investors, they're trying to move away from real estate and into like Chinese stocks. So it would be in their best interest to artificially beat down the investment prices so they can find better prices for these investments. There's numerous reasons on why, but that's one way to look at it. If you're looking at the financial system, and you're trying to militarize that in a sense. We've already done that with like the dollar, right? We use dollars to control how the world works. And that's if the United States manipulates the world with dollars, why wouldn't they do that with stocks? It's just another form of that, right? So it's like if they want Amazon to be the global giant that rules the world, or they want Tesla to be that, or Ford, if you encourage investors to invest into Chinese companies, say, oh yeah, Chinese companies are actually really safe, there's zero delisting fears, then people will invest in Chinese companies without feeling scared. And then companies like NEO or BYD will raise in hundreds of billions of market cap, and then they can raise capital, and then they can compete with their US competition and possibly beat them in many markets, which would take away from market share from these companies. So it doesn't make sense on why like there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt generated by US government and US businesses, because it does to me. But fundamentally, the odds of a war, the odds of delisting with China is just, I would argue, impossible. It's just impossible. So I guess with that being said, it's like you can't really stop the value of these companies being beaten down by propaganda and FUD and algorithms and investors and hedge funds. But you most definitely can understand that the risk isn't 100%. You can quantify the risk much better and say, okay, look, these stocks will probably never be delisted, but I do have to understand that these stocks will be tremendously beaten down. They will have the China discount, and they will be treated unfairly until the US cannot afford to beat these companies down more. And you just have to wait for that global shift where China starts having more power in the financial markets, in the general whole global economy, in the geopolitical world. You just have to wait for these things to happen. So China, when they find it their best interest to raise the values of their equities and stocks, that they do that. And may not be the time, but it'll come, right? Because you can't hold things down to ever. Nothing is really priced to perfection, but overall, things over the long run becomes priced more towards perfection. And these short-term volatilities are manufactured, in my opinion, because look, War of China, Chinese stocks delisting has been going on for decades. It's just rinse and repeat. I mean, even the war of Russia and Ukraine, it's not something that started in 2021 or 2022. It's something that's been going on for almost a decade now. And we have a lot of wars going on around the world, and we just focus on this one. Why? For our own agenda. So, with that being said, to me, if you just look at the numbers, just don't even think about the news, just look at the numbers, like the data, the trade data, it would almost seem like the US is becoming more and more reliant on China, and that's just not stopping. And if you're an alien looking at just the data, you would think, oh, China and the US are best friends. They don't go to war. There's a lot of trade. Yeah, that sounds great. So there's always going to be small hiccups here and there. But in the grand scheme of time and how big the world is, a lot of these things like banning TikTok, geopolitical tensions, daily news, these things aren't really that big of a deal. But another thing to consider too is that if you start banning, if people start using Chinese yuan or RMB, for example, there's a conversion rate to convert these Chinese yuan into US dollars. So it's like rather than convert your yuan to US dollars, you might as well just throw in the Chinese equity market. That way you can use that as a store of wealth, especially these values. But anyway, not a financial advisor, just my own opinion. And I guess my main point would be like, how likely is delisting? How likely is a war? Well, it's kind of like this. If you think that Chinese stocks are be delisted and there's a war with China, the last thing you're going to worry about is your Robinhood account. You're going to be worrying about food on the table and canned food, or if the whole world's going to be alive the next day. Because you can't have a war with China without a nuclear meltdown, okay? So, with that being said, I hope you have a good day.